yeah, it's just life has been in a really, really good spot, which is weird because it feels like the world's on fire. But yeah. But other than that, this has been it's been a relatively good change. But yeah, going to Playa is kind of one of those things that's celebrating that a little bit. And got good friends, good people around me. It's been good.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, been experiencing more of the stuff around my house, like, going and seeing what's around there instead of just, coming here.
Oh, and just leaving and going back and forth?
Like kind of like experiencing a little bit of Minneapolis
Noticing.
a little bit.
Okay.
Eyes open. It's been
Cool.
great, man.
You know what's new for me?
What's new for you?
Pecan Snickers.
Pecan Snickers.
I was in Chicago
Okay.
picking up Hallie
Okay.
from the airport, which is what dads do occasionally, is drive 5.5 hours to Chicago because your little girl who's 20 says,
Yep.
please, Daddy.
Yep.
And I was sitting in the hotel room by myself watching some Food Channel network. I can't remember, from Food something. And the commercial was Pecan Snickers. And I grew up in South Central Texas where we had pecan trees in our yard.
Oh, really?
Just picked buckets of them.
I just learned right now that pecans come off a tree, but keep going. I didn't know that.
That's awesome. No, they do. So that's great.
It's just like
That's
they
good
come
stuff.
on a shelf in a bag where I come from.
Yeah, they grow on trees and they drop. But and so I'm like, I gotta try that. And so actually, a staff person here heard me talk. Oh, Jenny works for Cub.
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, is this pecan thing in the stores yet? She goes, I think they have it at whatever other place yet. And she ended up going to get me one. She didn't do that, but when she was there doing something, she goes, it's so good.
Jenny's that person
She's
too.
very cool.
Like she'll catch something and then something will be on your desk and I'll be like, man, I didn't even think anybody was, I feel like we're similar in the sense we talk a lot.
Yeah.
So it's like, man, I didn't even think anybody was really fully listening in on that moment. And then Jenny is so great in that. But I mean, caramel, chocolate. I mean, you're
any kind of nut.
You're right. I mean, you're a stone's throw away from pecan pie.
Yep.
In that situation.
Yeah. Or what we say is pecan pie.
Well, you're a Minnesotan right now, so pecan is where we're at now, brother.
The college I went to in the town at the courthouse was a huge statue or whatever, a replica of a pecan.
Yeah.
It was probably 20 feet long and 10 feet wide at the courthouse.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
It's a state nut.
It's the state nut.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that either. Man,
every state has a nut.
I'm going to learn so much today. Not just right now, but it is episode 14.
I'm happy to be here for episode 14.
Lucky number 14.
Yep.
Last week, it was lucky number 13. And this week is 14.
Yeah.
And if I remember, we were talking this past weekend about legacy.
Yeah. So we'll start with part 1.
Okay.
Which will be a review of where we've been.
Yep.
And we're going to go all the way back to the beginning to kind of help remind us where we've been so that we get to legacy. We'll see what God has been trying to create this whole time and who God is looking for and what the characteristics of that person are in order to start building that legacy.
Yeah.
So just a reminder that we're dealing with pre-modern Eastern tribal people who are not Western modern minds.
Okay.
Like I said, it's a completely different context. We are immigrants to the story.
Right.
Heather and I were in Europe last January, and we're lost most of the time. I mean, we could navigate streets, and we had Google Maps and all that kind of stuff, but we couldn't speak the language. We sure would not have known any slang words, and even ordering off the menu was, we need help. We as Western Christians are immigrants to this story, but we treat it like it's our story. We treat it like it's a modern Western book.
It's almost like appropriation or something.
We have
like
appropriated the story. We have colonized. We're really good at colonizing.
Mm.
We've colonized the story, and in doing that, we've taken out a lot of the depth and the richness of it. And I had a person here who was talking about, because we started with Lost in Translation, a title that you came up with last fall, and they said, we want more Jesus when we're in Advent. They're like, thank you for more Jesus. Well, it's Advent. Of course, we're going to go through faith, hope, love, and joy and peace as we move into the advent of God's love into our lives. And of course, we're going to speak about Jesus. Jesus is not restricted to the New Testament. Jesus has been, the story of Jesus and who Jesus is wrapped up into this whole story.
Mm.
And our hope has been that this hasn't just been a Bible study where it goes up to our brain, but it hits down to our heart, because that's how pre-modern Eastern people see this.
Okay.
They're not necessarily concerned about paleontology or biology. It's all about experience and relationship. How do we experience this God, and how can we be in a relationship with this God that's being revealed through creation? So that's something to really remember as we move through this. A couple other things too. I think one of the biggest ones, and we talked about it this Sunday in worship that we'll get into in part 2, is the lullaby effect. Even though we keep talking about that over and over again, this is I think it's something that's been in scholarship, but I first heard about it through Marty Solomon and then through reading Rabbi David Foreman's books, that these stories are so familiar, or we think they're so familiar, that we lullaby them and we don't even think about it at all. Oh yeah, I know that story. And we miss the richness of what the story is trying to tell us. So,
have you ever had like a TV show that you put on for like falling asleep?
Oh yeah.
And then you all of a sudden it comes on like in the middle of the day on a channel.
Yeah.
And you like watch the episode and you're like, I forgot that like half of this even happened.
Yep.
But I've been listening to this TV show for 5 years to fall asleep to.
All the time.
So is that kind of like the lullaby effect that you're kind of saying, how we hear these
It's the
Bible
same
stories?
thing. Yeah. It's also what you talked about when you drive from home to work, back to home, you don't maybe even notice some of the stuff that's around you because it's just normal.
Yeah.
But when you stop on your drive and you look around, you go, I never noticed that store was there. Or I never noticed that was there.
Yeah.
I never noticed that was there, because we're not doing that. All we're doing is get from there to there.
Yep.
That is a Western mindset. A to B. Get from one point to the next. Where the Eastern
Check the box.
Check the box, we did it.
Yep.
And a pre-modern Eastern mindset is more zigzag. What's here? What's there? Let's pay attention to all kinds of things. Symbols, numbers. We talked about chiasms.
Yep.
And maybe we'll do a big chiasm episode, as there are massive meta chiasms in all kinds of different ways that cover entire books of the Bible. And we've got into verses, and we're going to do that a little bit today just as a review. And so just the lullaby effect. But then the other thing that's also hard for people is that when they hear something new and they think they've already had all the answers, they get upset. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about how many people were created at the beginning. And they start to go, what? And they begin to go, the foundation starts to wobble a little bit. That's why the story of looking through a window, and when you look through a window, you see from different perspectives, or different angles, you get different parts of the room. The room is the same. The room hasn't changed. It's still a room. There's still all the stuff in the room, but we don't always see all the stuff in the room. Or the idea of turning a precious gem from one angle to the next. and you look at it one way and it looks this way, and you look at it another way and you can see something else. You see different angles, but it's the same gem, right? It's not a different gem.
Right.
You haven't picked up a different gem. Just looking at it through different ways. And I think we need to be more comfortable doing that. And so we've been trying to do that, especially with that series Lost in Translation, as some of these old stories are just, who cares? Well, they're deep. So we'll start with creation.
Well, one of the things that you pointed out in the very beginning was when you, and I remember it just kind of like, I still think about it, and I brought it up just recently to somebody, was Adam and Eve, and that there were actually other people around.
Yeah.
But in my head, I'm like, but I've only ever heard about Adam, Eve, and the serpent, and that's it. There's nothing else.
We don't read the story.
Yeah.
We read parts of the story.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna jump into that in a minute here, especially when we get to Cain and Abel. So one of the things we learned from the Genesis story is, and it's interesting, it comes in threes. God is creator. God's image is one of creator. God's image is one of spirit. And God's image is one of word. And when we think of God's image, when we talk about it that way, in Genesis 20, verse 127, that Bible verse actually says, so God created humankind in God's image, in the image, a chiasm of God, God created the male and female. So that means that if God's image is one of creator, is one of spirit, and one of word, that's the image we've been created to be a part of. And when we don't carry that image and we don't bear that image well, it becomes ugly. We become not who God created us to be. We become a different image, and we're going to see that in some of the characters that are in Scripture that we're going to read about real quick in Genesis. So we're called to be creators. That's the image. We're called to be creators of good, because what does God create? God says it is good. We're called to listen and be guided by the Spirit, so that when we do speak a word, we speak light into the darkness, which is what God does in creation and what we see in the Gospel of John, which seems like a long way away. What are we, February 3rd or whenever this is being recorded?
Yeah.
We're in the first week of February.
Yep.
We started this in September last fall, and we're in like Genesis 27, 28. We are not even out. Now, we did take 4 weeks for Advent, but we're not even out of Genesis. And we're going to zoom along pretty quickly, but Genesis is just packed. So that's who we are. We're image. And then we're going to connect into some of these characters.
Okay.
Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. And they are stamped, we're all stamped with the image of God. Like a coin, Jesus says, when the Pharisees come to him and say, hey, should we pay this tax? Because Caesar's image is stamped on the coin. They're not even supposed to own it. They're not even supposed to be having it in their pocket. It would be considered idolatry to have a graven image, to possess it. But they have to pay taxes. And the only way they can pay taxes is through this Roman coin, which there's why there's money exchangers and all this kind of stuff in the temple. And there's just we're not going to get into that today. And Jesus says, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God's what is God's, which is give to Caesar is that the coin stamped with Caesar's image? Yeah, give it to Caesar. But what's stamped on you? God's image. So give yourself to God. So there comes that connection. Again, not separate from what Jesus is teaching us in all of his teachings. It's right there at the very beginning of all creation. So let's get to Adam and Eve, who don't trust the story. They don't trust that they've been stamped with the image of God. And I find the story of Eve very, very interesting. We're going to try to zip through this a little bit. People can go back, of course, and listen to the early episodes about it. We go deeper into this. But we're going to meet something very strange, a talking snake. And most of the images that we have of our art come from, I don't know, medieval, Renaissance times that depict the snake.
Yep. Realism, lots of realism.
Yeah. And it's a snake like we would see today. What we don't actually take time to stop and look at is this is a walking, talking, reasonable, rational being. It's a being.
Yep.
And it does everything that humans can do. Walk, talk, reason, be rational. And when Eve encounters this rational, talking being, the first question that this snake asks Eve is a leading question. Did God really tell you couldn't eat from any of the trees in the garden? I mean, really? Did God say that? And I always go back to, okay, that's like a lawyer with someone on the stand who already knows the answer and they're trying to trick the witness. Already knows it. Mm-hmm. Did God really say that? And Eve then begins to tell the story or give the instructions back to the snake of what God told her, but she changes it. God says to Eve, you may eat of any of the tree, any trees, shrubs, bushes, whatever you want to in this garden, but you cannot eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, when God says that, he does not give a location for that tree. Mm-hmm. There's no location. When Eve comes back with trying to repeat the instructions from God to the snake, Eve goes, well, God said we could eat from any of the trees in the garden except for the one that's in the middle. Mm. God never gave a location.
Really?
Eve gives it a location. And why is that? Well, here's what I think, and stuff that I've read, is that when someone has told you can't do something, what do you think about doing that very thing?
That very thing, yep.
And that very thing becomes the middle. It becomes the thing that you desire. So that tree may not have been located in the middle of the garden geographically, but it's located emotionally in Eve's mind. It has become the center of everything. She can't stop thinking about it. She can't get away from it. This is what she wants. That tree has become her desire. And then she goes and she looks at it. She gives into the middle, right? The middle should have been God's instructions. That should have been her middle. Her desire should have been God's instructions. Her guiding star, whatever you want to say. God's instructions should have been the middle. But the tree became the middle. God's instructions became not in the middle anymore. She looks at it and she ponders. And she goes, yeah, that's desirable. So she eats it. And then she gives some to Adam, who Adam is not just just passive in this. Yeah, of course, a lot of women in the Bible get a lot of grief, but
yeah.
And then of course, what happens? They know that they're naked. They now have the knowledge of good and evil, and they have a choice to make. But they hide, and they're naked. They're now no longer innocent, all those kinds of things, but they know the knowledge between good and evil. And God comes to them and says, where are you? I can't find you. Where am I? Where are you? And it's not the same as you're not looking for a lost set of keys. It's not a location. It's not like, where are you? Are you behind that tree? Or are you behind that bush? Or did you walk over to? It's not a where are you in terms of location. It's where are you in terms of your heart? Where are you in terms of your desire? Where are you in terms of what has become the middle of what you want now? And God knows that answer because the hiding means that they're not now within the they have not lived within the instructions. Their own desire has come into play, and that desire has led them out. And one of the things that I think is that I don't think that human beings were ever designed to stay in the garden. I think that we're always supposed to find our way outside the garden. And once we know the difference between good and evil, the knowledge between good, bad, not just bad like, cheating on a test or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think we even used this example weeks ago. It's bad in terms of cheating, like I'm going to rig some kind of a mortgage scheme and steal hundreds of millions of dollars from millions of people by creating this mortgage thing that creates the Great Recession in the world or whatever. Yeah. Like those are two different things. And, when you cheat on a test, you're going to get disciplined. You may get kicked out of the class, but you're not going to jail. But if you cheat on that level of scale, like rigging mortgages, somebody's going to jail, right? Or they should be. And so we have that knowledge. So once the knowledge is there, God does something pretty interesting, and he does it twice in this little short period of time. God then sends him out of the garden. And I don't think that's a punishment. I think God sends humanity out of the garden as an act of grace. God sends them from the crime scene. If you are stuck living with the crime scene, you're in hell. You're stuck in guilt and shame. There's no future. All you can look at is your own decision. You made this decision and there's no future. And that's hell, being stuck in constant guilt and shame. Constant guilt and shame is hell.
So here's a question, because I've been ruminating on this. So you earlier on Adam, Eve, that you said that in the garden there wasn't overly a knowledge of good and evil. But after the incident in the garden and they go out, they have a knowledge of good and evil, if I'm hearing that correctly. Excuse me.
Yep.
So my question would be, because you had mentioned we weren't meant to be, you don't think we were meant to be in the garden. And so we get this act of grace of going out of the garden, but now we do have this knowledge of good and evil, which is inherently separates us from being a beast.
From being a snake.
So if I'm reading through the lines here correctly, this needed to happen.
It did need. Oh, I think it was inevitable. I think that's just humanity's
by design, almost.
When you tell the story, that's the explanation we have of how human beings became human beings. Because without knowing evil, you never know what beauty is. You never know what joy is. You never know what hope is. You never know all those kinds of things. But we see what happens with the story of Cain and Abel, because Cain is going to be confronted with knowing the difference between good and evil. Cain brings an offering to God. Abel brings an offering to God. Cain's offering is judged as not sufficient, not because it wasn't a good enough amount, but because it was given out of obligation. Abel's gift was given out of love. And so God says, Abel's gift out of love, yes, I will accept that. Cain, your gift is not given out of love. It's given out of an obligation. I want you to think that through. Go back and redo that offering. Think it through. Cain gets upset and angry, and God comes to Cain and says, the beast is crouching at the door. The snake is crouching at the door, ready at all times, ready to come. And be aware that it's there. Okay, I'm going to go on a tangent.
I like it.
All right. I heard this just the other day. It's not my ideal. I don't even know where I heard it from. I heard it from somewhere. Let's take an orange. Take an orange.
Okay.
When you take an orange and you squeeze that orange, you get orange juice. No matter how hard you squeeze that orange or no matter how long you squeeze that orange, you're not going to get apple juice. You're not going to get lime, lemon. You're not going to get grape. You're not going to get any other juice grapefruit juice, which no one likes. I love grapefruit juice. You're not going to get anything else other than what's in that orange. When we, as human beings, encounter pressure, or we encounter stress, or we encounter negativity, or whatever it is that's squeezing us like we squeeze an orange, whatever comes out of us is what's in us. If we have, now we're not talking about being a perfect person, but if we have more serenity, or if we have more peace, if we have more positive characteristics within us, what comes out, like when we get cut off on the road,
Yep.
like driving back and forth, and I did that for years. I commuted for years. If our immediate reaction is what's ever in us.
Yeah.
So if we are filled with stress and pain and shame and guilt and frustration and anger, that's going to come out right away. That's why we call it road rage.
Yep.
Because it's already in there. And God is saying, Cain, I know, but it's there. If you let it in, when you get squeezed, that's what's going to come out. The beast is going to come out. And Cain, that's what happens. The beast comes out because Cain gives into the beast. And when Cain was squeezed, the beast comes out and he kills his brother. So now, I don't know.
It's interesting because when I look at it, I commonly, I have this conversation, or I see it in people when you're like, when all that stuff is there,
Yeah.
and you like, for Cain and Abel, and the story is it came out to the person he not necessarily wanted it to come out to,
Yeah.
but it did because it was in there, and you don't have control over it.
Yeah.
There's like commonly where like someone will come up and they're just mad,
Yeah.
and they light into you,
Yeah.
and it's for all these things.
Yeah.
But then you're like, okay, but what really is the issue?
Yeah.
And it's underlying, and you realize it's not really about you or that moment.
Yeah.
It is more about what was incised when we were squeezed.
And I'll give everybody that's listening who does not work at a church a little insight. Those of us that do, we encounter criticism constantly from people.
I had 3 sound complaints on Sunday.
All the time.
Yep.
People are walking around with all kinds of things in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when they feel squeezed or something, they let it out. And a lot of times if they go to church, they'll let it out on a church staff person.
Mm-hmm.
It just start swinging.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've had people, I've been doing this for 30 some years, people that just come out swinging right away. Why do we do this? Why do that? You know, okay, yeah, hi, how are you today? How are things going? Are you all right?
I would say
let's start
service
there.
industry folks too.
Service industry, anybody that you're exactly right.
Like,
Yep, it seems to be low-hanging fruit
yeah,
you like that?
I see what you did there.
for complaints and agitated people to just throw stones.
Mm.
I do get lots of feedback where people start out with, "Hey, I'm not trying to sound negative. I'm not. We love what we're doing. I'm wondering about that. Wow, what an amazing thing! Because you know what's in that person when they're being squeezed. There's a sense of joy and appreciation, even though there might be a little bit of a critique. Amazing,
Love
awesome, beautiful.
Yep.
But yeah, service industry people get it almost. You know, servers.
Oh,
You know,
poor servers.
anybody that's serving anything. I mean, that's what happened during COVID. You had people going into all these grocery stores and all these convenience stores, and all these people getting mad and swinging and throwing just doing whatever, because what's in them is fear and anger, and there's no way for them to get it out. That's why one of the most powerful prayers that people can ever pray each and every day is a serenity prayer. God, grant me that whatever happens, that I am peaceful inside. That's why meditation and prayer are so powerful. And God says, the beast is crouching at the door. You gotta have something else.
Beast isn't self-aware.
No.
It is so interesting when you do run into those folks in those moments where they're coming in with a bunch of guff, and they're gonna be like, and this person, and I've seen it happen before, and friends and whoever really like, I have had the roughest day, and this might be coming out of that place.
Yeah.
But this is frustrating me.
Yeah.
And even just that little bit of self-awareness makes you feel less like a beast to the person standing in front of you.
It makes you human.
Yeah.
And not a beast.
Yeah.
And when you're able to have that kind of interaction with people, you're able to then hear. The other's able to hear. Or you're able to just go, I'm just really struggling with this.
Yeah.
You
don't feel personally attacked by a beast.
No.
You feel like, oh, okay, well, this is a conversation with a human.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had so many conversations with people who come out swinging right away, and then you ask the question, what's really going on? And it has nothing to do with what they originally came into. There's a loss of sense of control in their lives. It becomes more of a pastoral care thing than anything. So not to say that people don't have great opinions and great ideas and they shouldn't share those things. But it's easy. It's why social media has become so ugly, and why message boards are so ugly, and trolling. I mean, we give these things names because people who are mad about whatever's going on in their life jump online and just dump, and they don't. The beast takes over. I am currently right now, I'm not boycotting news, but I don't watch it anymore. I know what's going on in the world, but I want what's ever in me when I get squeezed. I want what comes out as peace. I want what comes out as a sense of wholeness. And that is not always the case. Because God's warning is for all of us, and it's there for a reason. Sometimes things do come out sideways. And then it's the conversation with that person where it comes out sideways and goes, yeah, that came out sideways. That's not who I want to be. So God's searching for that kind of relationship with human beings.
Yep.
And as we zip through now, and we're going to go that Cain and Abel is this experiment. Cain makes a choice, and then God does to Cain what God does to Adam and Eve, sends Cain away. Now here's going to the question that you had: how many people were created at the beginning of the world? Most of us grew up with this literal understanding of Genesis. There's actually 3 different creation stories in Scripture, or 3 different explanations of creation. The big one is, of course, Genesis 1, the 7-day creation, all that kind of stuff. And there's museums and all kinds of stuff, people. And I think the fear is if you begin to ask questions about it, then you throw the whole thing away. And that's not the case.
Right.
It just makes it even more deep and more rich, even more purposeful. So if you want to start at the beginning, and I did this in worship, and it made some people upset because their whole life, the Sunday school answer was Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel.
Yep.
But they stop and they don't keep reading. So at one point in time, if we want to take the literal, if the creation story is a paleontology biological explanation, it is Adam is first, so there's 1. On all the earth, there's 1. Then Eve, 2. All of the earth, 2. Then Cain and Abel, 3, 4. So on all the earth, at one time, there's only 4 human beings. When Cain gets sent away after killing Abel, Cain gets married. Who does he get married to?
Right.
Who does he get married to?
The snake?
No. There's some theory that the snake wanted to marry Eve, but that's a whole different thing.
We'll go down that road.
That's a whole, like, he's trying to get, there's a whole Jewish midrash on that. But there's a bunch of other people out there.
Yeah.
So this story is not paleontology, nor is it biology. It is not meant to answer those questions. It's not meant to be in a Bible or in a scientific book. That's not what it's meant to be. And when we put it that way, we strip it from all of its richness, and we strip it from the experience of what God is actually trying to do for us in those stories. So in this whole story, we have God seeming like to search for a partner. Adam and Eve, no, didn't fully work out. Cain and Abel, no. I always think it's interesting. Abel wasn't even able. Like, Abel wasn't even given a chance to be able to be a partner.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't know if that's really able.
I was waiting for that. I was waiting for I was like, I think he's going dad joke here.
Was it even? It's dad joke. That's true.
It was there. You were in the ballpark.
It's an insider, weirdo, Christian, whatever dad joke.
It makes sense, though. I mean,
Cain
I get it.
Even able, yeah. And then God finds Noah, and that seems to work out pretty good until Noah curses his own family. That is a rated R episode.
When we talked about it the first time, like, we got into it just a little bit, but it's a family-friendly show.
It's a family-friendly show, and none of the explanations that I've come up with are what we want to talk about. Yeah. So we'll move on.
When we get to the podcast, Trust the Story After Dark.
After Dark, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The Saturday Night Live after the after show. Yeah. The cable version. Yeah.
Tune into Channel 19. We'll be there.
It's interesting. And then God finds, God knows when to stop destroying, by the way, which is an amazing reality, because most gods don't. When God says the bow in the clouds is going to stick up with the pointy end up, the receiving end up, and then we have the world is filled with a couple of a Nimrod, right? Building towers of self-worship, and God says, we're not having that. These people can't be my partner. And then God finds a partner. A person named Abraham. And the reason why I believe God finds this partner to be like, okay, we're going to go with this partner in our story, is that Abraham does something that you don't really see patriarchal people do in this part of the world at this time. He marries someone who's not going to have kids, which means his family line is going to die with it. He's not going to be the patriarch that he would have dreamt to have been. His wife, unable to bear children, but he does it anyway. And God says, I can work with someone who's willing to sacrifice their own future for something else, for something bigger. And of course, we know that down the line, we're going to get to part 2 next week. We'll dive in a little bit more about who he gets married to and what all that means. But God says, I can work with this person. And God then says, I'm going to make a covenant with you. And he does that suzerain vassal covenant, where this really gross
blood path.
Ritual, the blood path that comes around, and they cut these animals up in half and they put them on either side, and there's the blood runs into the middle, and the person that is making, there's a covenant between a much more powerful person and a much lower, like a greater king and a lower king, a less powerful king, and the less powerful king asks for something from the high powerful king, and in order to make it come true, in order for that covenant to be realized, the lesser power has to walk through the blood path and says, if I don't keep my covenant, you can do to me what we've done to these animals. And God says to Abraham, you need to do this, and you're going to have to walk the blood path. And Abraham freaks out. He gets everything set up. He freaks out and he paralyzes. And God says, I will do for you what you cannot do for me, which again is New Testament Jesus stuff. This is not just old story stuff. This is exactly what God has been trying to do all along. God says, I will do for you what you cannot do for yourself. And walks the blood path on behalf. So God not only makes the covenant, but God keeps the covenant, which is unheard of. And then we get into the family dynamics between Hagar. Sarah can't have a kid, gives Hagar to Abraham to fulfill the promise. Hagar gets pregnant. Sarah gets jealous, bullies her. Hagar runs away with the promise. Is what we know. She's been brought back into the group, into the tribe, and then Sarah gets pregnant. Hagar has her son Ishmael. Sarah has Isaac, and then there's this interchange between Ishmael and Isaac that we're going to get to next week, this coming week, Sunday, and we're going to talk through what that dynamic was. And Ishmael and Hagar are kicked out of the camp, and Hagar is in suffering, and God comes to her in her suffering and opens up her eyes and says, here's by the way, here's a promise, and we'll get into that promise later. And this brings me to this point right here. I want to push this book.
A book. We're getting the Paul Dean book club at some point.
Yeah, I just met this person.
Okay.
And when I was doing a whole thing on Isaac and Ishmael, I'm like, I need someone who can speak to me about this. And Rachel, I met, I don't know her. I shouldn't probably call her by her first name. Rachel Jones, because I had coffee with her. And she's someone who lived 20 years in Somalia, surrounded by Muslims. Her goal was to go as a missionary.
Mm-hmm.
And in her role as a missionary over 20 years, she found deep connection with Muslims and the Islamic faith, which strengthened her own faith, strengthened it. It's beautiful. It's a memoir. It's beautiful. I recommend it. You can get it on Amazon. If you're going to get this book, get it and read through it if you can. I want to try to get her. I've talked to you about this. I want to try to get her here.
Oh, it'd be amazing.
Pretty busy lady. Like I said, I spent maybe 45 minutes with her at a coffee, and it was awesome. And I think I only scratched the surface of the knowledge of this lady. I know that for sure. And she grew up Minnesotan. She's born here, raised here, Brooklyn Center, or New Brighton. I think, are they right next to each other? New Brighton
and Brooklyn Center.
Yeah. Something like that. Okay, I don't know.
Maybe.
We're in the South, man. Oh, I drove north. I drove north.
I'm from Fort Francis, Ontario.
That's true.
Originally, they all start to mold together after a while.
But I find it to be interesting that this Minnesota. She grew up in Minnesota. She has 3 kids. One of her kids was born in Somalia, and Christian, and found a deep connection with the Islamic community, which typically we find ourselves at odds, like, oh no, they're the enemy and all that kind of stuff. So she did wrote a book. I recommend that. And then we moved through, as we moved to the end of our part 1 here today, which I thought was going to be shorter than it
Actually,
is.
it's going great. We're right on time.
Okay,
We're right on time.
God then instructs Abraham to take Isaac out for sacrifice, and we talked about that 2 Sundays ago. And we're going to get into that a little more because we're going to get into Isaac here. But the story between Abraham, if people want to do a deeper dive, the story of Hagar and Ishmael and the story of Abraham and Isaac are mirror stories.
Interesting.
There's almost a chiasm piece in there, that they mirror each other. There's an A and A, a B, a C, a D, all pointing to the area that God is providing, because the promise is real. And God promises to Hagar exactly what God promises to Abraham. God promises to Abraham and Hagar the same thing. You will be blessed, and you will have descendants. You'll have more descendants than you can ever imagine. And it ends up that Abraham is the father of 12 tribes. Ishmael becomes the father of 12 tribes. And the mirrors are there. We're not supposed to be enemies. Mm-hmm. But the beast crouches at the door, and the beast has been crouching at the door and taking over people for a very, very long time. And it's going on still to this day, of course. And then, of course, we're going to go into Isaac. Isaac is this older child. He's not going to be as young as we think he is when we go to sacrifice. This kid can carry wood. Mm-hmm. This kid can carry wood up a mountain path, straps wood on him and carries it up a mountain path. This is not a baby. This is not a young boy. This is a lad.
Yep.
And so Isaac seems to be passive in most of his life, and we'll dig into that. But he doesn't go find his own bride. He's tricked into giving the blessing to somebody else. Isaac is just there, but he carries the promise. But the biggest thing, I think, one of the biggest things, not the only thing, but one of the biggest things, I think, what God does with Abraham and Isaac is God says, hey, this project that I'm about being a blessing to the world, it's not going to start with child sacrifice, which was a thing. There are people that go, no, it wasn't. It was a thing. When they talk about passing the kids through the fire, there's different Bible verses that talk about that. It was a thing. And God says, that is not the project that we're creating. We're not going to have this as a part of us. So I think we can stop there.
All right.
And pick up part 2.
So we got to recap part 1.
That was a long recap.
That's okay. To be honest, I love it because we're also like filling in some things that we didn't talk about.
Yeah.
So like if you are like wanting to go and check out the other episodes, there's a lot in there that isn't covered in this recap, but there is some nuggets here that you talked about that you brought in that is helpful. Okay, well, that is this week.
Yep.
That was episode 14. And
we're growing up. We're in our early adolescence.
We are. We can almost...
We might be Isaac's age.
We'll be driving a car soon.
That's right. Ooh, yeah, it happens.
It does. It does. You don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah. No, I don't. Well, I still worry.
I mean, it's still...
When our daughter went back to school today and it's been snowing a little bit, you go, oh, okay, 2.5 hour drive, but she'll be fine. More
experience. You've been here for a while. Or did you tell her to put winter air in her tires?
I did not, or I did not tell her to put fluid in for her blinkers.
Oh, okay.
Because the blinkers would freeze up. Thank you, Paul Gaucher, Pastor Gaucher. I don't know if you ever were watching this. Shout out to Pastor Paul Gaucher. Funny moments in 1993.
93. Yeah. I was in middle school. And with that, thank you, PD. Appreciate you. If you're watching online, please subscribe. Please like what we do. We are not just on YouTube, but we're also on Spotify if you're just looking for the audio experience. But we will see you next week.
All right.
All right.